There's a particular type of memoir that is colloquially called a mea culpa memoir. This is very favored by celebrities and other types of self-help gurus. Basically, a mea culpa memoir exists to explicate previous bad behavior. This memoir is very often about addiction. Sometimes it's about coming to Christianity or other religion. And sometimes it's about overcoming bad coping mechanisms to previous trauma. These type of memoirs are very popular for a very specific reason, and that is because they are helpful to people who perhaps are struggling through the same thing or have a loved one who is struggling through that exact same thing. I am very much in favor of these types of memoirs. However, they do come with a very particular landmine. That landmine is, how do you explain who you were as a person at a very not your best self time of your life, and still come away feeling that the reader will sympathize with you, and, very importantly to a lot of self-help and memoir authors, that they will like you. That's what we're talking about today. Hello, Shameless Writers. I'm Kristen McTiernan, the nonsense-free editor, here to bring you your regular dose of writing wisdom. I apologize immediately because I realized that my heat was blasting full force when I did that intro, but I was so taken with my own eloquence that I decided not to re-record it, so apologies. It'll be quiet from here on out. We're about 2 years into my channel, and to date, the most popular videos that I have are almost all about memoirs. The second place coming in at a very close second is my planner stuff, which is weird, but okay. Glad someone likes it other than me. Not only do I get the most views on my memoir videos, I also get the most engagement, specifically questions asking me, is this a good topic for my memoir? Is it okay that I write a memoir with these details in it? Can you tell me how I can write a memoir and not have people hate me when I'm done? The great news about that last question, which I get with astonishing frequency, is that yes, there is a way that you can write a memoir about your behavior when it was admittedly not your best, and you can still come away with the audience having positive feelings about you as a person. First of all, I want to get something out of the way. The idea of the good person is wildly different for different people, even people who live in the same country with the same culture, ostensibly. They all have different ideas of what makes a good person a good person. So before I get into this video, I do want to caution you about becoming overly invested in what the mob has to say. I have also made a video previously about whose opinion matters and why their opinions matter. More importantly, in that video I include whose opinions don't matter. So I recommend watching that maybe when we're done with this one. There are certain steps that you can take in addition to writing well about your journey just in general that will help the reader come away with, one, a full understanding of who you are, why you did what you did, and how you're not that person anymore, and two, understand that there before the grace of God go I. What happened to you isn't something that could only happen to you. It could also happen to others, and following these 5 steps will help illustrate that to your readers. Number 1, make it clear why you indulged in the behavior in the first place. Like I said, most of these are addiction-oriented. So if that's the case for you, explain why you became addicted to this particular substance or behavior, because keep in mind, addiction is not just about drugs. If it is a substance, explain that high to us. What was that first high like? Because as I understand, if you get high on whatever, you're always chasing that first high. I heard that on television because that is my only experience with drugs. Tell us why you became, if you were addicted to anger, why were you addicted to being angry? Was it because you felt powerless in your life and it gave you a sense of power, or did it give you a sense of being seen? You probably didn't have this type of insight in the moment while you were struggling with your addiction, but logic dictates you have it now. So don't feel like you have to be trapped in the moment of your narration. Having your narration style be you now looking back into the past is a perfectly valid way to write these books. I've mentioned before that I kind of have serious problems in dealing with celebrations of particularly drug addictions, but in all sincerity, my addiction trigger, if you can call it that, is gambling addiction. However, I did read a memoir by a client who struggled with gambling addiction, and by the time I was done reading it, the way he described that the high of the hope, I guess you could call it, I had a much softer perception of gambling addicts after reading his memoir, even though I had to stop watching Law and Order SVU because Rollins relapsed into her gambling addiction. That's how much I hate it and have a problem with it, you guys. But his memoir humanized his struggle, humanized the people who deal with this issue, and I'm so glad that he decided to work with me. And I'm glad I got over my initial discomfort and agreed to work with him because I'm better for having read his book. Make us understand why you struggled with what you struggled with. Number 2, show us your previous failed attempts to get over your issue. No one gets over their addiction or chronic behavior on the first try. You can't because it's an addiction. And so painting yourself, whether intentionally or not, as having just decided to get over your illness and move on with your life is disingenuous, it's dishonest, and it is helpful to no one. You might feel that talking about your previous attempts to get clean or change yourself are repetitive and or unnecessary. I assure you they are not. As a young woman, I was a big fan of the band Korn. Technically, I still am, but I've kind of moved away from that harder music. I am much more into Celine Dion now in my dotage. I was a huge fan of Korn, and I had a huge crush on their bass player, Fieldy. So imagine my delight when I found out that he wrote a memoir about getting clean and coming to religion. I do want to make a note that my 16-year-old fantasies of what a relationship with him would have been like were so wrong, you guys. Oh my God. That would not have been a match made in heaven. Good heavens. But part of Fieldy's memoir was talking about how at some point he hated being on drugs, and he was on several. It was not just the one drug. And he did not shy away from his abominable behavior towards his wife, towards his bandmates, towards everyone in his life, including his parents. He did not shy away from his disgust with himself. Now, it can be loosely interpreted that Fieldy just decided to stop doing drugs. And he did. He did not go to rehab. He didn't get locked into his bedroom a la train spotting. He just said, I'm done. And he was done. But there were previous events where he had tried to stop and failed. There were previous events where people who loved him asked him to stop and he didn't. What made him stop, yes, was a decision to stop. He genuinely didn't want to engage in the behavior anymore. But it was also a two-pronged tragedy that made him stop. 1, his father passed away. 2, he was in danger of losing his wife, who he was abusive towards. And finally, 3, which was very positive, thanks to his father's influence in his life and the fact that he passed away, Fieldy came to religion, specifically Christianity. And he was much less insufferable about it than when his bandmate Head came to Christianity. I think we all kind of rolled our eyes. Even fellow believers, we were all like, yeah, okay, Brian, just dial it back a bit. The fact that he didn't skip straight from I'm a bad drug addict who hits my girlfriend to, oh, I'm clean and sober now and also I'm a Christian, made his conversion seem real, it made it seem relatable, and it made it seem like something that anyone else who's struggling this could also do for themselves. It was especially important because celebrities so often tout these very expensive rehab facilities when, if we're being honest, these successive rehab facilities are not great. The story showed that you don't need to shell out a bunch of cash to get clean. You just have to really want it and also have that failure behind you, which helped you finally find success. Number 3, don't make it all about you. It can be very tempting to gloss over how your addiction or your flaw hurt others. Of course, you wrote the book because you want to write about how it hurt you, how it hurt your life trajectory, I guess. Oh, I lost a job because of my behavior. Oh, I missed my brother's wedding because I was high. And it's really tempting to keep that camera lens of your writer's POV directly and only on you. Don't fall into that trap. It will be uncomfortable, but ideally speaking, you will hear from the people who you harmed during this part in your life. If you were in a state where you couldn't perceive how you were hurting them in the moment, that's perfectly understandable and very common. However, now that you're free of that influence, you do understand it now. And if you don't have the proper perception on how your behavior harmed others, then as uncomfortable as it might make you, I highly recommend engaging in some interviews. Ask your brother what he was thinking as you slept off a bender during his wedding. Was he worried about you? Or did he just shrug his shoulders and say, "Oh, that's my gross, junky brother, missing my wedding. I didn't expect him to show up at all anyway." Tell us what your brother thought. It's okay to get out of that moment and look back. It's helpful even, because realizing that other people exist and other people are harmed by our actions is a vital part of the mea culpa memoir. It's no good admitting that you've done wrong without focusing on the people that you've done wrong to. Number 4, be honest about what made you change. A lot of people think that that final decision to get clean or get away from whatever toxic influence you had in your life has to be something big, like a near-death experience. Oh, I got into a motorcycle crash because I was drunk and I realized that alcohol was ruining my life and I'm free of it now because I was so scared of dying. That does happen, but it's not always something big. And if it's something small, what I've found is that a lot of memoir writers just kind of skip over it. They just talk about the bad things that happened while they were addicted or while they were in their struggle. And then they just say, and one day I decided to stop. And when I press them on it, they say, well, there really wasn't anything. There wasn't anything. I just was tired of it and I wanted to stop. Okay, why? Let me give you an example of a previous client who I had to harangue. Oh, I can't believe this woman gave me money. I had to harangue her I had to pull it like a rotten tooth out of her. It was exhausting, you guys, but ultimately she was able to verbalize. The reason she was able to overcome her food addiction was because, drum roll, she adopted a dog with severe mobility issues. That's it. She didn't have any children. She didn't have a partner. She had family that she was estranged from because they were just over her and her food addiction and her seeming unwillingness to get better. But then, as a favor to a friend, she adopted a dog, an unadoptable dog, who couldn't move around very well. I can't remember if he had broken legs or if there was something wrong with his spine or something, but the dog needed her care very intensely in order to survive, let alone be happy. And what she found as she tried to care for this rescue dog is she couldn't move around very well either because of her size. She also came to realize that as she wanted to make the dog happy, she was hesitant to go outside because of her appearance, because of how physically arduous it was to move. And so having that awareness snapped her out of her food addiction. Not immediately. It was a very gradual process where she was slowly but surely able to reduce the amount of food that she took in. And most importantly, she went to therapy, which her family had been begging her to do for well over a decade. And she had steadfastly refused. I don't want to change. You just need to accept me who I am. She went to therapy and she lost hundreds of pounds without surgery because she adopted a special needs dog. Because someone relied on her. That's, in the grand scheme of things, it's a small thing. It's a pet. But that pet made an enormous difference in her life. And it was such a small thing that she didn't even realize that it was the dog's need for her attention that made her stop what she was doing and come around. She had made all of those huge changes in her life, and she hadn't really given a thought as to what that spark was that started it. You didn't just wake up one day and decide to randomly be a different person. Tell us what prompted the change. It makes a huge difference in audience investment in your story, and maybe investment in the change that they need to make in themselves. And finally, number 5, tell us how your life is different now. This is very important because we treat addiction and dealing with trauma as like a race. Well, okay, I just need to get to that finish line and I'll be fine. But that's not the way it is it? So tell us, what measures do you take to keep from backsliding? Did you have to remove friends from your life? That's very common with addiction. You have to get rid of perhaps childhood best friends. Perhaps you even had to exclude family members from your life because keeping them in your life would mean that you would stay in a life of addiction. Every choice in life that you make, you are choosing not to do something else. You are sacrificing something. Tell us what your sacrifices are, because ultimately that will help your reader genuinely understand the journey that you've gone on. It's not always happily ever after. Maybe you have lasting physical effects from your previous addiction or from, an accident that you got into that changed your life. It's not all sunshine and roses, but you chose the life that you have now, despite its drawbacks. And there are drawbacks, as opposed to the life you had before. And if you've written it properly, as your reader, we will be able to nod along and say, yes, I understand that was a hard choice. And I understand that your life isn't perfect now, but I definitely understand that it's better than it was before. Then you know you've done your job. If you watch my videos and find that you like my commentary, I did want to announce that I have created a new Substack, which, if you haven't heard of it, is kind of a newsletter especially for writers, whereas my previous mailing service was more about marketing, it's frankly not what I do. I generally don't have physical products, but what I do have is my writing, my analysis, my reviews, and my commentary, and that will be coming to you twice a week for free with an optional upgrade if you're interested in also reading my fiction. My newsletter is called Worth the Telling, and there's a link below where you can sign up to get my extra material, the first of which was published yesterday, and it's all about AuthorTube and the death of creativity on platforms like YouTube. I'd love it if you joined so I can talk to you more directly as opposed to just through our awesome shiny screens. So that's all I got for this week. If you enjoy this, give me a like and subscribe, and of course subscribe to my Substack newsletter as well. And until next week, take care and write well.